All right. Welcome. Tonight we have Shem Jacobs and Elkman in the house. How are you guys?
What's going on? Appreciate you having me.
Good.
Chillin' turned conversation into a random stream, but I think we got some good content tonight. Gonna cover some mound updates, some weird things we found in history, as well as some alchemy by the sounds of it.
Yeah, hopefully look into this weird book that I read recently and see what you think about some of it.
I always love a good alchemy read.
Yeah, it's called The Hermetic Arcanum. Have you heard of it before?
That sounds familiar. Do you know the author?
Let's see. Oh yeah, it's by like an anonymous author because they want to keep it secret who wrote it. I guess it's one of those situations.
Is this the one or no?
Oh no, that's not it. This is
We'll put that
basically
back
what I'm
down
working
now.
on, yeah. But no, we'll pull that up in a minute. But yeah, it's just really interesting the way it's described in the book and what they're talking about. I just want to see what you think about it. Basically,
do you have a copy of the book we can load up, or do you have a hard copy? Or
no, I don't have a hard copy, but I do have a digital version we can check out. But
perfect.
I guess we'll start with that. Why not? Sure. I brought it up if you want to share the screen. Okay, so yeah, basically this book is going through it seems to be going through a step-by-step process of either creating the Philosopher's Stone or something else. So at the beginning, it kind of talks about keeping it a secret and all this stuff, and talks about something to do with the history of alchemy. But anyways, what I wanted to get your opinion on is it says perfect bodies as Sol and Luna are induced with perfect seed. Therefore, under the hard crust of the perfect metals, a perfect seed lies hid, and he that knows how to take it out by the philosopher's solution hath entered upon the royal highway for. So, in your opinion, what do you know what Sol and Luna would represent in alchemical?
Sol and Luna?
Yeah.
Like the sun and the moon, aka gold and silver, as I've been saying and postulating all along that the philosopher's stone is monoatomic gold silver combination, and this would seem like they're saying that again with the perfect metals. It says, right? Sol and Luna, and then the perfect metal. Yeah,
nice. So
that's what I think of it.
Let's read some more of it. Most philosophers have affirmed that their kingly work is wholly composed of Sol and Luna. Others have thought good to add Mercury to Sol. Some have chosen sulfur and Mercury. Others have attributed no small part in so great a work to salt mingled with the other two. The very same men have professed
to mingle with salt, connect the two into salt water to get your monoatomics. That's what I do.
Yeah, so this sounds accurate to something that you would actually do.
100%.
Because I don't know much about Mercury, or I don't know much about alchemy. But when I was reading this, I was just shocked by some of it. Because towards the end of it, it starts to sound like, I don't know, it sounds really weird, but it seems like they're creating almost like another version of the Earth or something. It sounds like the way some versions of the planet are described within like a sealed container, and the way like the atmosphere and the clouds move. I think it's down here in like 88 or something. Let's see if we can find it.
Really?
So I don't know. Yeah, it's a really long read, so I don't want to go through. We can't just like read all of it, but I mean we could read, but see if I can find it real quick.
And does it also coincide with like alignments of like stars and planets and stuff at the same times of these things? Kind of like the almanacs and all that stuff too?
Oh, absolutely. I've found like the lunar cycle when making monoatomic silver very important. Like you have to have it close to a full moon as opposed to waning or waxing. It barely makes any. So, as it was saying there, in alignments, that it would be, I guess. See, now that gives me an idea for experiment of trying making the two combined while the sun is up, but also while the moon is out during the day and towards the full moon, and see if that has an effect on it.
I could. I mean, It seems like some parts they're pretty straightforward in this book, but then other times they're speaking a parable because, like, for example, you like that there's that theory of the red dragon with the moon during apocalypse, for example. For some reason, in this book, they mentioned something similar to that. It says like right here in 68, the resolution of the elements into homogeneous water, the eclipse of the sun and the moon, and the head of the dragon. So this is like describing a step
Mhm.
of this process. Really strange stuff.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, like, the red dragon, I suspect, is this red state, Ormus, like monoatomics that comes out, or nanomaterial stuff that comes out, and it's extremely reactive. I've been able to get a few different metals into this red state, but yet to be able to get silver or gold into it. And it's sounding like it might be giving a description of how to do that, and it possibly be when they're during an eclipse.
Yeah,
And like, as the
Fascinating.
red state, are we talking about red Mercury, or like
Yeah,
something we're unaware of that we're looking for as like to create, or is it something that already exists?
I think you're right on that. That getting it into the red state and getting Mercury into a red state, with all the legends and conspiracies around red Mercury, uh, wouldn't surprise me if that's what one of the goals they were going for was.
this is probably the last thing we'll look out for the book for today is the part I'm talking about where it kind of describes stuff that sounds similar to, I guess, if you could imagine creating another Earth. The circulation of the elements is performed by a double whirl by the greater or extended and the less contracted. The whirl extended and the less or contracted. The whirl extended fixeth all the elements of the earth, and its circle is not unfinished unless the work of sulfur be perfected. The revolution of the minor whirl is terminated by the extraction and preparation of every element. Now the whirl, there are 3 circles placed, which have always inversely moved by matter, by an erratic and intricate motion. So it eventually goes on to describe just like earth and water and all this stuff being moved around a certain way, and kind of describes different motions of like stuff that seems similar to like the atmosphere, the clouds. I don't know. It's really interesting stuff, but
It sounds like it's almost describing the self-organization and the different exclusion zones that form in these electrolysis reactions in the water, potentially. And it, like, I'm not sure if you've seen some of the videos of my experiments I've put up where it literally looks like mini galaxies in a jar. That potentially that's what they're describing.
that's what it sounds like to me too. Because yeah, if you read it all together, you get some weird images in your mind. That's all I can really say. But I didn't really understand most of it because, like I said, I'm not an alchemist. I just randomly came across this book, and for some reason, I couldn't stop once I started. But
I like
I
that.
don't really understand what's happening in it, unfortunately. But I just figured I'd share it. But yeah, that's about it.
I do appreciate.
We'll leave that at
Gives me a
that.
few ideas.
But yeah, other than that, I've been working on just a few videos. Been looking into Japan a little bit. Found it interesting because I was reading Volume 5 of Flamenco and his theory about the Tartars going over to Japan and being the samurai class. Found that
Really?
interesting. Other than that, I've been looking into like the mystery religion and stuff like that. What about you guys?
Alchman, you want to go first, or?
Um, I've been looking into a bit, just kind of trying to research back in Chicago, but like not going full crazy with it. But I found like a few interesting documents that I can pull up pretty soon. But one thing I wanted to talk about quickly, I know we've talked about it probably too many times, but is the article Antiquities of America from the Raftsman's Journal. It mentions a lot of things in it that I find interesting, and I'll share it with you all in 1 second.
Yeah, the Rasmussen Journal. has some crazy stuff on it.
Yeah, it's been shared before, but here it is again.
What we're looking at now, we're waiting on that. This is the necropolis underneath the Vatican. It's got a lot of Roman, Greco-Roman stuff for some reason. It even has a painting of Lucifer.
That's wild.
A tomb called Lucifer. It's right here.
Like,
Mausoleum
what?
U.
Something that you wouldn't really expect to be at the Vatican.
Yeah, exactly. But
Very
yeah, on the official Vatican website, it's labeled as Lucifer Mausoleum U, and here's a picture of Hermes, I believe, and another one of them.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Looks kind of similar before they painted it there. The picture below, the one you have up, very similar to Malta's Hypogeum.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, it's probably a related civilization. I mean, this is underneath. This is pretty far underground, right? But I guess it is a tomb, but it does look weird. Pretty massive.
It looks like just another underground city, right? Built on top of.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably more to it, but this is just what you have access to, right?
Exactly. You want me to pull up yours there, Elkman?
Sure.
Ah, you're sounding better
So
too.
yeah, we've gone over this one before, I think, but this is the Raftsman's Journal from January 6th, 1858. I used to be able to find the article on archive, but now it's just on a couple websites. So, but there was one part I thought was interesting. There's this whole article is actually very, very interesting, but I don't want to start reading it from the top because I won't be able to finish it, and that's happened many times before. But there's a part in it that talks about statues in New York, and I've been trying to like I'm asking for help a little bit. Like I've been asking everybody if they know what they are, because I swear I researched it before and was able to find some of them, but now I can't or have forgotten what it was. I'm not sure if the statues that still exist in Central Park, but I think they're supposed to be older, and the animals. Well, here it is right here. In the state of New York, have been found sculpted figures of 100 animals of different species, executed in a style far superior to anything exhibited by any of the existing tribes of Indians. The state of Ohio abounds in ruins of towns and fortifications with extensive mounds and pyramids. At Marietta and in Missouri, beautiful pottery, silver, copper ornaments, and pearls of great beauty and luster have been dug from the earth. In the caves of Tennessee and Kentucky, mummies have been found in a high state of preservation, clothed with cloths and skins of various texture, inlaid with feathers. Also, what's interesting to this is I won't be able to pull it up on a whim, but in Tennessee, I believe also in the caves, they found a certain color of paint or something. I remember I mentioned it to you before, Shem, and you said it was important because that color of paint that they're finding under the ground there at that specific spot proved that certain
I think it was
peoples have been here.
I think it was the Tyrian purple, but I don't remember.
Yeah, that's what it was. It was the Tyrian purple, and if you go to research this online, it's very hard to find. But there's a guy who has a YouTube video, and he goes to the museum there where they dug it up, and in the little small town museum, they talk about finding the Tyrian purple there. But yeah,
Yeah,
I was just wondering if anyone had any info about those 100 animals. But the Tyrian purple was really important as well, and it kind of tied into this article in a way that I had never thought about before, and it just that thing was kind of interesting that fact. But I
Yeah.
can't remember why Tyrian purple is important at this time.
Because it proves that the Phoenicians. It lends evidence that the Phoenicians were over in America doing things, or at least some sort of trade where they could get access to that because it was created by the Phoenicians.
Exactly. It proves or means that there had to have been pre-Columbian voyages and trade from the Mediterranean over to North America to those tribes for them to have that Tyrian purple.
Yeah, and it also talks about Marietta being a thing of trade, which we've talked about many times before too.
It says it says and pyramids, or okay, so there's a period at the end of that. I thought it was saying pyramids and Marietta, but I see now.
I swear, maybe at the beginning of this, if it talks about pyramids too.
Because Marietta had some pretty big forts down there, and they said it was a Roman fort in that other book, The Antiquities of America or whatever.
I'll just read a little bit. Strange as it may appear, America abounds in its antiquities, so extensive, so beautiful and majestic as to rival those of Thebes, sorry, I can't see it. Neve. Ruins of ancient cities, immense extent, fortification, mounds, and pyramids. So what you said, that's true. Ruins of ancient cities of immense extent, fortifications, mounds, and pyramids. Temples with walls built of hewn stone, showing refined taste in architecture, and adorned with human figures, beautifully executed. Large altars ornamented with hieroglyphics, probably giving record of those who reared them, but which no man has been able to decipher. And those are like all through like Colorado, even up through like Peterborough, Ontario, Newfoundland. You find very similar like carvings or engravings and petroglyphs as well. With these marks of ancient greatness prove to us that this is not a new world, but that a powerful empire existed at a very remote period of time, teeming with a population highly skilled in arts, in a state of civilization far beyond anything we have been led to conceive of the Aborigines previous to the discovery of the continent by Europeans. Yeah.
I mean, I agree with that. It seems that there's a ton of evidence to suggest that there was definitely some sort of civilization here, and why they would not be able to build the same type of structures as everywhere else on the planet is beyond me.
I fully agree with that. It's just a giant cover-up that they've decided for some reason at all costs to make it that there was zero Atlantic travel for the majority of history, even though it seems like it was an everyday thing throughout all of human history.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, I'm just reading chat.
Yeah, me too. Good comment by Tara Payne. The star fort on Kauai is called the Russian star fort, or the Russian fort, even though no Russians ever went there. Or did they?
Is that in Hawaii? Because I think Sarah
so.
was talking. Yeah, Sarah was talking about how there was a Russian fort down there too. I found that fascinating. It's really far away.
Sounds like could be the same one potentially.
What you got there?
Sorry, one moment.
I guess this is just, I guess, more evidence that there would be a civilization here beforehand, because we've looked at this before. This is the book that was along with the 1893 Columbian Exposition in Chicago. I mean, we talked about this a million times, but it's like the solitary Indian monarch was monarch of all the land they surveyed 3 years before the World Fair started. So the implications of that, just with these buildings that are clearly or likely here before the World Fair in some cases.
And like I still have lots of like, I know I've done a lot of this research with you, but I still have lots of questions of who that monarch actually is. And I know, yeah, it's still not been proven yet.
Well, it's hard to figure out, but there were Native American chiefs involved in the 1893 World Fair, apparently. So they also consulted with the Iroquois apparently about it.
And I believe those chiefs are the ones that we showed last time that have their faces in that building in those gold.
That was the one I wanted to show.
But yeah, it is interesting that it was like under rule of a monarchy until the World's Fair basically as well too, and how quickly it took over. And I wonder if it also had to do with the doctrine of discovery as well, which I will bring up.
Well, you mentioned to me before about how they had a choice between assimilating to the new government or just being banished with the rest of the natives who were there, and I agree with that.
Yeah. So like I don't know if it's all at the exact same time, but it's all within a few years that like you either you either had to take part in the new world or stay as part of the old world, basically. So you could either be like a person who lives in a city and be considered like a white person or a slave, basically, or you could be an Indian or a Negro, but they kept making everyone have choices between things that were arbitrary, and they set everyone against each other and pitted everybody against each other in this world, and that's how they were able to take over everything really quickly. And I'll bring up a quote that like states this a lot better than my little ramble there, but like basically I believe that like you either got a top hat or you were sent to a poorhouse, or you were allowed to stay on a reserve and not take part in the city, or
Well, in this time period, there were still massive rebellions going on in the West.
yeah.
I mean, I
So,
think there are certain restrictions on Native Americans until like the 1990s, all the way up until then. There's like some of these conflicts are still taking place. But one interesting thing is this is a soldier field, and it says right here that it was built between 1922 and 1924. But this photo right here on the left is from 1925, and it's like already looking pretty weird and old. And is this the condition that something brand new would be in? This is also the area just north of the World's Fair for some reason. Just everything about it's strange.
yeah, and like the whole area around the World's Fair is very strange because they talk about that pier, and then last time I was on Google Earth, it almost looked like there was a buried star fort in the water there, but if you zoom in too much, it kind of disappears.
Really?
Yeah, kind of. And there has been descriptions of it, and like Shem and I have talked about it before, but like it's hard to get a lot of information about Chicago and what was there. It's really really washy.
Yeah, there's so many narratives about that try to cover it up. It's unbelievable. But this is a photo before the World's Fair. I believe this is in like 1887 or something, and it's on the island in the middle that had the Japanese buildings, and they say there was nothing on the island or nothing there at the time. But this photo, like these look like structures to me in the background. If you can see on my mouse,
I'd
these look
say
like
so,
buildings.
with columns, and that it got dug out by the looks of it.
Yeah, I'll show you what I'm talking about here in a second, I think. So yeah, they say it's all marshland before the World's Fair. There's nothing there. So this is the area I'm talking about. This photo is offset before, and there's a bridge connecting to the island. But that could have been easily built quickly, I guess, right after they purchased the land. I guess it's not that big of a deal. But this is another photo of that same area, and we're about to zoom in. So yeah, it looks like there's structures here to me.
Well, yeah, the roads are going
Yeah.
somewhere. It looks like a farmhouse.
The columns are. It looks like there's like Corinthian
Yeah.
columns.
Yeah,
to me.
columns.
But I mean, it's a really bad picture, so you can't really tell. But yeah, there's so many anomalies about this.
The quote I had was it's a paragraph.
Oh, it's a Japanese village there.
Yeah, and a lot of these are permanent buildings.
Oh yeah,
they
these
were there.
survived. These are only
We
burned
talked
down
about
after.
Jean Baptiste being there before the fair too.
Give me 1 second, boys. I'll be right back.
Yeah. In the war preceding 1703, the government of Massachusetts gave 12 pounds for every Indian scalp. In that year, the premium was raised to 40 pounds, but in 1722, it was augmented to 100 pounds, a sum sufficient to purchase a considerable extent of American land. An act was passed on the 25th of February, 1745, by the American colonial legislature entitled "An Act for Giving a Reward for Such Scalps," etc., etc. Not content with this execrable pollution of their minds by the agency of lucre, we have sworn party division among Indians, which in all discordant shapes rages with uncontrolled sway. Their nations are split up into fragments. The son is arrayed against the father, brother against brother, family against family, tribe against tribe, and canton against canton. They are divided into factions, religions, political and personal, Christian and pagan, and Seguaha of Sconadoy and Captain Peter. The minister of destruction is hovering over them, and before the passing away of the present generation, not a single Iroquois will be seen in the state of New York. So that's all important because this is all happening at the same time. And basically, it just is an entity turning everybody against each other to colonize the land at the same time that this was all happening in Chicago.
Right? That divide and conquer that they keep on using on us. And it said canton, and weren't like cantons more like Japanese Orient style communities and terminology?
It's also still in.
Sorry.
Oh, in modern day Europe, there's places that are cantons. I'm pretty sure in like Switzerland or something like that. I'm not. Don't quote me on that exactly, but I do remember it being somewhere in Europe they still have cantons. I'll look it up real quick. Why not? But what were you gonna say, Elfman?
Oh, nothing. I was just like buying time to get back and just digging for that quote. But
Yeah,
I was just saying that's all happening at the same time that this is happening in Chicago. So it was just a really quick amount of time where everything got switched over.
26 cantons in Switzerland. The Swiss Confederation. So yeah, that's interesting because Confederation is exactly what these people were said to be, and like the Tartars or the even the if you just go off mainstream history, the Native Americans were confederations, the Iroquois Confederation, right?
Absolutely. Just every single little rabbit hole you go down seems like just more evidence that there was a prior well-developed, spread out civilization across the Americas and the rest of the world.
Yeah, but the narrative about those buildings being permanent or not being permanent is ridiculous. In that book that we started with in this video, it lists like how each building was made and stuff like that. And I only remember like maybe 3 or 4 buildings they mentioned that they were made with the stucco or whatever. Everything else, they had debates in the newspaper back then about if they're going to tear down the buildings and use them for resources to build other things in the city. So if they're temporary, why are they having these discussions about using the materials? Doesn't make
And like,
sense to me.
and there was already buildings in Chicago at the same time, maybe not on the fairgrounds, that were like technically skyscrapers made out of steel. So
That's
when they're
the
talking
weird
about
thing about it.
tearing
Look,
down the building for resources, they're talking about tearing down steel. And how did they have that at that time? They did.
like when you look in the backgrounds of these photos though at the World Fair, you never see like skyscrapers and stuff in the background in Chicago. That's another weird thing about it. And the Japanese buildings, like we mentioned earlier, just they were permanent buildings that survived the fair, and they were only burnt down in World War II. And they say it was because people were mad at the Japanese for Pearl Harbor. That's why they got burnt down. So just more examples of permanent buildings.
Yeah.
Although they do say that they were remodeled to be permanent after the fair in some sources. So do with that information what you will.
Remodeled, like not that, and it says remodeled, not renovated. So essentially, it's like they were just planning on destroying all the buildings, and then they're like, "Hey, maybe we should keep it and turn it into other things." Potentially,
Some of them they did do that with, but I think mostly they were just reusing the material for other buildings. Not sure. I mean, there's other examples in history where they say that about certain structures, and it never made sense to me. I don't know the process of how they do it, but I know that multiple buildings in multiple places in history, like for example, the Great Pyramid of Giza, they say they took the stuff from that and built it other
making
places.
stones. Yeah.
See what I'm saying? So same concept there, I guess. But this is a quote from one of I think an African American dude who was saying that he was upset that they weren't included in the fair. But this quote's important because it says, "Once stood the red man's wigwam here, met their old men and young men and maidens." So this is talking about the area where the World Fair was, and keep that in mind. The wigwam is like a meeting place for Native Americans, and you're about to see why I'm saying that in a second. Because this building down here on the bottom left, this is where Abraham Lincoln was nominated to become president in 1860 in Chicago, and this building is called a wigwam.
What? That's a wigwam.
So the wigwam
Yeah.
was a convention center meeting hall that served as the site of the 1816 Republican National Convention.
And isn't that the
Wow.
same building where they had the meeting of all the religions at the World's Fair? I'm pretty sure it is.
I'm not sure, but that would be
They had it
interesting.
there.
So this
Yeah,
building still survived in 1909, by the way. I think it might still be there today too. I'm not sure.
That's wild.
So why is that significant? Because if the Republican Party is meeting in the wigwam, that alludes to the possibility that the Republican Party has something to do with Native peoples. Keep in mind, in Chicago in this time period, a lot of people were like Irish, or so the people who decided to stay behind after the Indian Removal Act and stuff like that, and then just a bunch of people who sold their farmlands they were promised a better life in Chicago, so that's why they came there. Basically, they basically signed up to the new slavery that occurred after the Civil War, like sell everything, rely on us. So Abraham Lincoln, back then, they represented the Republican Party as you see right here on the right. This is propaganda against them. It represents not white people. It represents this. It represents the other people, right? So that's more evidence to show that maybe the Republican Party back then was something that was more representative of Native peoples and the other people, right? Just speculation, could be completely wrong.
The top hatters, the shadow people with top hats.
Here's more propaganda saying that Abraham Lincoln was black. There are some legends about that, or that he just wasn't white. I mean, one interesting thing is that his family was over in, I believe, Kentucky it was, during the Indian Removal Act, and they actually had to leave to go to Illinois. So is that evidence showing that he actually was Native himself? His family is Native. So let's read some of this. Mr. Lincoln usually had little to say of himself, the lives of his parents, of the history of the family. Yeah, so their removal to Indiana. So they got removed. That's why I brought that up. So that, keep in mind the
What
Indian
year is
Removal
that?
Act.
Sorry, what year is that around?
Let's see. I don't remember off the top of my head. 1830. So this is 30 years before he was nominated president. So Lincoln's contemporaries largely reviewed him as white, and the president indeed presented himself that way. I think there were quotes before this that we didn't read that talked about him thinking, other people thinking he was black. Yeah, let's go
But
back.
this is very important too, because it also ties into um, this thing called the doctrine of discovery, which if he was not considered white and he was considered Indian, they could technically take over his land.
I think it was more of
So
like, I know what you mean by that, but I think it was they used him potentially to get the trust of those people since he was a representative of them. Let's consider that he was part native or something. So he's basically being used. And then after they're done using him, they assassinated him, right? And also
yeah,
think about what you said about that John Baptiste guy who was allegedly the first settler of Ohio. You said that he was described as being the first white man, but we know that according to mainstream history, he was a Haitian and he was actually black. The terms white and
it,
black probably meant very different things in the past because black seems to have been used for like an alternative for like barbarian or something like that, or uncivilized. It didn't necessarily have something to do with the color of your skin, whereas white was like a civilized, or they contributed to the society or like the government the way that the order wanted it to be.
yeah,
But
I think the quote is I think the quote is the first white man in Chicago was a Negro named John Baptiste.
yeah, so the first white man. So why are they saying it like that? A lot of old dictionaries are hard to find, so it's really hard to figure that out. But yeah, here's an example right here in the middle of the screen for anyone wondering about why people thought he wasn't necessarily white.
But they could have also had to say that too as well, so this doctrine of discovery didn't happen, because I'm thinking that happened there too, because if it was ruled by a single monarch and then all of a sudden it was gone, we've read that it's been sold. We've read that it's just kind of been like grown organically. We've read a lot of things, but we know that there's was a lot going on there at the time, and everything gets messy between like 1740 and 1810, it seems, somewhere in there.
Well, with what you're saying, what we could speculate about would be that there was some sort of event that took place like that, but some people left and kept revolting, but some people decided to stay. So that's why you have examples of some Native American chiefs being at the World Fair or participating. Maybe it wasn't necessarily a violent takeover at all, or because I mean, leading up to the fair, there were tons of like workers' revolts in Chicago and all over the country at that time period. But think about once
Yeah,
again
and it
who the
would have been
workers
worth
were.
huge money too.
Yeah, I agree. So like you have examples of a couple of Native American chiefs participating in the World Fair. So something, I don't know, something weird was going on there. And the Council of Women is also interesting because they apparently had supreme power over the last decisions that took place in all the governing body of the World Fair, and it ties into the whole Iroquois Nation thing with how they also had a Council of Women, which selected the chiefs and stuff like that.
Correct. And it still does kind of operate in some places like that to this day.
And this
And
wasn't just
also they talk about that in is it in Plato's Republic? I
talk
don't
about
know,
what.
it's been compared to uh I can't remember. I don't think it's Republic, but I thought something talked about how it was the Council of Women had ruled, and that was uh, the way they modeled the current government after in the United States. But I believe that was all based on Plato's Republic, so I could be tying too many things together right now.
Yeah, maybe just the structure of it was based on Plato's Republic. Who knows? But this didn't just apply to Republicans though, because later on, for some reason, I think up until 1917, it kind of switched over to the other side. There's an organization called the Tamani, which started meeting up in wigwams, and they had strong political power, especially in the state of New York. So it wasn't just a Republican thing that included Native Americans. So I'm not sure exactly what happened with that situation, but we'll see here in a moment. Yeah, these
Yeah,
are
New York's where the Iroquois Confederacy would meet.
So yeah, this is just talking about the 1830 relocation over here on the right, where we were talking about how his family was forced out. Just a little bit of evidence to maybe consider that he could have been native. This is a political cartoon making fun of the Democratic Party, and what's significant about this is that the place they're meeting at is called the Wigwam, the Democrats.
And even then, it's like, no, it's not a tent or a teepee. It's still a building, and sure, they're trying to make it look like a doghouse, but it's a building, not just some tent. Nothing
Yeah.
temporary.
Look at that flag in the background. I'm not sure if that's an old state flag or what it is, but it's very interesting. It has these dots. It's like a star. 6-pointed star, actually, almost. So this is the Tamani thing I was talking about. The 1868 Democratic National Convention was held in Tamani Hall headquarters. This organization has a lot of sketchy history. If you look it up, you'll hear about this one like mob boss guy. I forget what his name is, boss something, but that's like what you'll mostly hear about. It's like a cover story for some of this stuff. But basically, these guys had a lot of power in politics until World War One. But this is the building. This is the wigwam that they're meeting in. Look at this. This is beautiful. It has like a
It's a wild cathedral.
yeah. Basically, it's like yeah, Rococo art on the ceiling. Ridiculous. So yeah, this is based on this guy named Saint Tamani, which is like a Native American chief in the northeastern part of the United States, and apparently he made deals with the British, and he was like embraced by Christianity and everything. That's why he's a saint now. But that's what this society is based on. It's interesting that their logo is like a Phrygian type hat as well. So this is describing the Tamani. I'm going to read this passage over here on the right. In early times, the society was divided into tribes, one for each of the 13 original states. There are the eagle, otter, panther, bear, turbot, rattlesnake, tiger, fox, deer, buffalo, raccoon, and wolf tribes, which stood respectively for New York, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia. You get it.
So all those places were already connected at this point too.
Exactly. And they all had this group, which is identifying as tribes, meeting in wigwams. But they're not Native Americans, according to mainstream history. But although some sources and some books do call them Native, there's the excuse that they give is that they were copying Native Americans, but it's just not necessarily true because they're. I think it might even be in the screenshot, but I'm not sure. But one of these screenshots I'm about to show in a minute, it talks about how a lot of these people were Irish Catholics, which is very important because in some situations they were considered in the same class as natives, and like they were just on the same level as them. But down here at the bottom,
they were because a lot of them they were already from in New France when it was occupied before it was America.
there's one more thing I wanted to read from this. Yeah, it says the name Wigwam was given to their meeting place. The Barton's Tavern was selected as their first home. Move on. The Anti-Federalist Party. This is important because the Anti-Federalist Party, the Federalist versus the Anti-Federalist, was like the first battle in American history, and it kind of like represents the Confederacy versus the international bankers, which we don't have to get into. Yeah, this is just showing more connections with natives. The native wigwam was opened in 1811, still using wigwam.
Right? Like
Okay,
that
so
the wigwams were buildings.
this is what I was talking about when the Irish were considered basically like, so it says Irish vote from the wigwam over the Germans. So the Irish are participating in these wigwams.
Please.
And if you look at, for example, like I know people don't like to think of like white people as natives, but type in APTN news on YouTube, and there's like a Canadian news channel that covers only native people in Canada, and literally 90% of the people you see on that channel look European.
And that's why it's important too when it happened in the 1700s because basically you either had to get a hot top hat or go to a whorehouse. So yeah, they just made you choose everything. They made all the people they made everyone who was already there classify themselves as something they weren't, or else criminalize them, basically.
And by they, I'm pretty sure you're talking about the Jesuits, right?
No, I don't know. The Jesuits were already there, so no.
Well, can you say who you're talking?
Yes, at the same.
Are you allowed to say it? If not, we can move on.
Okay.
Powers that be.
And okay. Yeah, so this is just talking about when they started coming to Providence in New York. Blah blah blah. Yeah, so this is a little bit about that guy I was talking about on the right here, Saint Tamani, King Tamani, Tamanend, various names. It's hard to find information about this character actually. Let's continue. Just a nice, beautiful picture of the World's Fair. What's interesting about this picture is you have the Phrygian cap on top of this androgynous god, which could represent various figures. This bird on top of this little globe or leahuna or whatever it is, they say it's an eagle, but when you look at it, it looks more to me like a cuckoo bird, which is very interesting because a cuckoo bird is a type of bird that puts its young into other birds' nests and has other people raise its children for them. So why is that significant? Because with these World's Fairs, you have the incubator babies and all this stuff that people speculate about all the time, and like the orphan trains and all that stuff, and the idea of them introducing a new civilization. So is this a subtle hint at the idea that they're having other people raise the children that were shipped over, like for example with the Irish getting shipped over during the potato famine and all this stuff, and also in America itself, people were taken away from their parents and sent out to these farms to work and stuff like that, right? Like there's multiple examples of other people during this time period raising other people's children in mainstream history and the overpopulation of orphans. So is this just a nod at that with using this bird to symbol at this festival? Who knows?
And like
be.
even 100 years, like 200 years before this, we've got like examples of like Native Americans living in castles, like giant
Exactly.
castles that still do exist, and that's 200 years like documented before any of this happens. So uh yeah, so there's like a big distance in what we associate with what was going on here and what actually was happening. Like they were considered kings. They went and met with the queen and uh England and France, like from both like what we would call Canada and the United States. Like before that even existed, they were like doing trade with them as well too.
Yeah, that's a very interesting story. If you want to bring up some pictures of those kings, that'd be cool too. While
Yeah, I'll
sharing
bring it
these.
up. I was just talking to a buddy about them the other day.
This is another example of one of those wigwam Tamani meeting places right here. It's still around today. Apparently, this is what it's been turned into. But yeah, another thing is if you go to like small towns in your state, you'll likely find these Greco-Roman decals all over the buildings, whether it be an acanthus leaf, whether it be like this weird Native American carving or like a French looking or like a Roman looking guy in a little depiction. You'll see it everywhere for some reason. The fleur-de-lis, sometimes even swastikas. It's unbelievable. Fascies everywhere. I mean, they remove them in like the major cities, like for example in Columbus, Ohio, all the buildings have had all that stuff removed from them on the outside. But if you go to the small cities, they're still there. They haven't had a
Yeah,
chance to remove them all yet.
there's a few still in Ontario that have them, but they're getting removed really quickly.
This is just talking about, these are just accounts of people taking, of the natives they came across. The inhabitants are white in color. It's basically saying that I'm not saying that every single native was white, 100% not saying that. I'm just fighting against the narrative that none of them were white that's provided to us in the mainstream education system. There was a mixture at the end of the day, at least.
And I want to say on this too is like we found maps that called this whole area Nova India at the time. So like we've said it many times, but if anyone's like catching up, like I speculate that it was just a culture very similar to what we're at now, maybe scaled down a bit, but a mix of all different colors of people. But like the but they were all different kinds of colors of people back then. But the place was called Nova India, and that's why Indians was a thing, and that's why you had to choose between what we've mentioned earlier as well.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But the Nova India thing is out there too because it's only on a few maps, and like not. It just depends upon who. Back at that time, the communication wasn't as good as it is now, so many people thought many things were different things at the same time. Like it was called Cambodia, and it was also called Canada, and like lots of things existed simultaneously that people had different ideas of countries and continents because lines weren't drawn in the sand as much back then, or they were just starting to, apparently.
Some of the old maps just could have been people making claims to it as well and giving it names that they wanted it to have. This is the article from Mind Unveiled's channel that talks about how the Germans thought that Chicago existed for longer than mainstream history gives credit for that World Fair thing. Says so apparently like this guy wrote in telling them about this, and then they posted something about it, and then a couple weeks later they immediately backtracked it for some reason. But it says the oldest appearance of the name Chicago Shilaga on an engraved marble slab prepared by the court carpenter Hans Schieferstein in the year 1615, the Royal Historical Museum at Dresden, Germany. So this kind of lines up with some of the maps I've shown on my channel recently. There's a map that I found from 1697 that shows Chicago having a star fort. So 1615, I know that's quite a bit of time before 1697, but it's still in the realm of possibility. Especially since you consider that in Europe, from like the 1000s onward, you have examples of these star forts, right? If not before, it could even be before that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so 1615, they say the oldest depiction of Chicago.
And that's kind of around the same time when the Jesuits were going through and documenting everything as well too, which is important because when they were there, they already had tour guides who spoke French to help them out, who were the natives of Canada and United States. But what we don't know is that they were captured by the Recollets or Reliquets or Recollets. They're another group that predated the Jesuits, but they don't talk about that very often either. But they do, like when the Jesuits do come here, they do describe people as like totally fluent in their language and speak more eloquent than people do in the court of the king back home, or like something to that effect. So it so that proves that they did have they were well educated and did have societies that were equal to the people that they were dealing with before at one point in time. Because if they, yeah,
I mean, it's unbelievable it's unbelievable that they were able to communicate so easily. I always found that fascinating, these old stories, but they always give pretty lame excuses. So here's one example of the map. I think this is I don't think this is the 1697 map though. I think this is the 1830 or the Henry Popham map from 1733. Try to see if I can find the 1697 one. Let's play it for a
we
second.
have it in a book right here, but if you've got it there,
But regardless, this is a star fort in Chicago. I think this is the Henry Popham map though, so I think maybe the 1697 one is next.
And that's in the same area where I think you can see it on Google Earth if you.
So just more proof that this map is accurate, because the mainstream narrative is that this map is inaccurate. This is Fort Frontenac, which still exists today. They still have ruins of it. It's a 100% verified site. So for some reason, this part's accurate. Everything else is accurate, but they completely messed up over here in Chicago. They got that completely wrong, even though it's based on a firsthand account by two explorers who I call Smollett because
Right? Like,
because I can't say the names because they're French.
it makes zero sense. Like, no one in that time frame is going to just randomly draw a structure or a place that isn't there. Like, you'd get shot for that. You'd lose your job for that. You'd never be able to publish again for that. Like, it's just insane. Like, there's no logical reason to put something on the map that's not there, because people are going to be using these maps literally for traveling and trading. That's the whole purpose of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense at all. Here's another example, just another example of Chicago at least being on the map. There's no star fort here. It says either fort or a flue, which is like another word for river, so it could be either, but still it says Chicago. This word actually means garlic. They say that this is describing a place where they used to, or like a wild garlic grew. That's why it has that name. So this is the guy we were talking about earlier that was described as being the first white man in Chicago. He's also the first permanent settler in Chicago. So they say he's black, but in the source we talked about earlier, we already went over it. We don't say it again. So yeah, here we go. The site was known to local names as Chicago, or the wild garlic place. Trying to find that 1697 map. That's why we're here. It's got to be around this. So yeah, these are the two explorers though. So this is their names. Play that for a second. Yeah, so right here, Joliet and Marquette, 1673, they traveled through this area. They described there being 300 cabins, all this crazy stuff. Not sure where the map is in the video, I'm sorry.
Mm.
Oh, here. Also, maybe the first one was that map because this is the Henry Popple map. So yeah, this is another example from 1733. So the first one we looked at was the 1697 map. This is the 1733 one where the Star Fort is still there. So this is Chicago right here. And they show other Star Forts that still exist today. This is in Quebec. This still exists today. It's that huge building called, I think, Chateau de Frontenac. There's two other Star Forts by Montreal.
I've actually
Yeah, there's
visited
quite a
it.
few.
Fort Frontenac, which still exists today once again, and then down to Chicago that is detailed, has cabins, has everything around it, has rivers, a portage, which is a place where you carry your boat on land to the next place to travel. So they definitely know what they're talking about. So let's go back to the 1697 map one more time since I messed that up royally. But yeah, there we go. 1697, 1693. This is the map that they had of Chicago with the Star Fort.
And then also, what doesn't it also include like the canal that connects to the lake to the river or something that supposedly
Yeah, it
was
went from
built
like
after?
all to Florida, but that was like the giant trade route.
Yeah, they did say that the canals were man-made too, though.
Yeah.
I mean, canals have been impressive, made by humans since the beginning of recorded history, so it's nothing that's out of the ordinary. So, this is in that 1893 World Fair book. It's just talking about how the Commercial Union League and Iroquois clubs to take action in the matter report. It's just talking about how the Iroquois were like involved in discussing what was taking place at the fair. It's just a random quote from Flamenco talking about how America was still Tartaria.
Oh, remember, what about Merchandise Mart?
Merchandise Mart.
Hold on, I'll bring up a thing. I've got the Four Kings on one tab, but I'll bring up Merchandise Mart as well. I believe that this is the location in Chicago when everything went down. Just one second, I'll bring it up.
Yeah, I'll read this real quick while he's doing that. Let us remind that yet in the 17th and 18th century, the west and northwest of America were part of Moscow Tartary. The Muskegee. Above, we talked about the American Indian people called the Muskegee, Muscovy. It's difficult to get rid of the thought that the name of Muskegee sounds similar to the I think he says like the Moscow Gizas, Moscow Cossacks. Kind of cut off.
It does, though.
Keep in mind that these people were called the Greeks of America by the people when they first got over here. Cherokee were called the Romans.
Really?
See what else we got here. Random connections between people around the world. This tomb right here is fascinating because this is, or no, that's not the actual tomb. That's the one that's similar to it. This is the tomb right here. This is Theodoric, the guy who overthrew the Roman Empire. But what's interesting about his tomb is that the ceiling apparently used to be painted with a replica of all the zodiac and the night sky, and it was shiny and everything, and it like when you walked in there you could see everything, which is interesting as well because the first emperor of China, that Emperor Shen or whatever, the guy who has the terracotta soldiers, his tomb is described in a similar way by Shen Qishuan, I believe. I don't remember what his name is. The ancient Chinese historian, he describes the tomb of the emperor, and he describes it in a similar way with the ceiling being painted just like that. Why did they do that? Who knows?
That's wild.
You got that quote pulled up, or
Nope.
I'm just kind of just filling time here, waiting for that.
So Merchandise Mart, if you check it out, I propose that is possibly the location of the star fort that you speak of. If you check it out on a map, the streets are very angular, not like these ones, but a Google Earth map, and it's got a very interesting history. But why I ended up looking this up was because the one building that we've researched before was the first building apparently, or the first skyscraper made out of stainless steel, and it's become a bank or something now, but inside it they still have impressions of, like, I think it's about like 20 or so chiefs' faces in copper. So I believe that building is very important, but I also believe this one is too, um, for the reason of the location of it, where it's on, like, in between where all the rivers are, for the way it looks, for the size of it. And it also has an interesting thing where there was 56 sculpted heads of American Indian chiefs all around the building, but they've all since gone missing or been sold to people, and they come up every now and then. And it's also interesting to note that in 1899 and 1900, there was a chief on the penny instead of I don't know what normally would be on the American penny in those years as well. But also, I haven't gone too deep in Merchandise Mart, but it is something worth digging a little bit more into. And there is, I don't know why it looks like this in this photograph, because all the photographs I have seen online, there's a big copper, like more like dome shape on the top of that center, like the center area of it.
So
But
this is you suspect is the building that is built on top of the foundation of the Chicago Star Fort, correct?
possibly. There's also another location further up the river, right on the lake, that looks more like the area where Shems would be, that has been flooded out, but it could just have been so massive that it was this entire place, which is looking more like it. Because if you, I don't want to pull up Google Earth because it'll crash, but like if you look at this area over on Google Earth, it does get a little bit more star 40, but that's like mostly just speculation. I haven't done too much research on it, but I did come to a lot of interesting finds while researching the merchandise mart. The other thing that I was pulling up before was the four Mohawk kings, or the four kings of the New World. So these guys were all from New York, and they went to speak to the queen. So they've also been, yeah, and they've also been represented as like white people with long beards. As Yeah, it's very interesting, and like a lot of native peoples in Ontario and New York probably have relatives that are these people. Because like I've done a few what's it called, genealogy or ancestries with friends, and they come back, but these were the people who were living in castles, and those castles still do exist, and this was in 1710. So uh, you've got the Brants, you've got uh, kings, and see, note they're called kings at this time, king. uh, Also on maps they're called kings, queens, and princesses and princes.
They're able to communicate with the people, like the Queen Anne, who they're going to see.
And they have, and it's important what these people think. I've got different books and texts, and they're always portrayed differently. In the, I think it's called Native American or the American Indian, published by National Geographic from like the 80s. It's got the most interesting, but you can't find it online. I did post it to a website, but I don't want to go on a hunt for it right now. But basically, like, they compare these people to be as eloquent as Shakespeare, and they were honored to have them there at this time. And I think this is like a big part of like American, I guess, history that is not talked about, and
Click that.
not a lot of
Click that
people are
European.
even aware of this. Not like even native peoples I speak to, unless they're basically Brants. So like there's Brantford in Ontario, and these people went on to form Brantford, and like all the Ivy League colleges were created by and for these people we're looking at right now. Um, I don't know if it's Rutgers or like all the ones in New York. Um,
It's a
I,
fascinating connection. Can you pull up that European picture that was at the bottom right down there too? Read that
yeah,
back real quick, Bernie. Yeah, that's how they're depicted sometimes as well. And Queen Anne, there's like the whole Queen Anne's revenge thing with the pirates, right? And the pirates are accused of being a certain type of people. So I don't know. I think it's really interesting how they're able to communicate, and all this took place, and they wanted to meet each other, and that they were considered kings, and they were basically equals to a certain extent. I don't know.
well, if we're talking about criminals sailing ships, like basically New France, which is like a lot of the eastern coast was populated by the I can't remember what the quote is, but like the French that came over to populate were criminals as well. So like they could be considered pirates as well in some people's eyes. But I don't think in this particular case. But we have this story over. Why I'm saying this is because we have constant a story over and over and over of people populating with 100 criminals of different lands, whether it be Vikings or French or whatever, and the story comes up over and over and over again. And this story of the native peoples of Canada, there's many different accounts of the exact same story, but with different people. Um, there's a chief from Ontario or possibly Quebec named Constant Panisi, and he went and communicated with the Queen over specific things, and also like Etienne Pigarouche and Mestig Gooch, I believe. Like, there's also stories of two brothers that went over there and communicated with the king and queen. And then there's also the two brothers from Micmac that went over, and it's the same story over and over and over again up until the 1700s, and then everything quickly changes. And I just think it's all important because they kind of still all have us divided, or attempt to divide a lot of people with skin color and camps and all that, but it's the same story over and over and over. All it doesn't matter what kind of color the people are or what you're classified as, but it's these same stories over and over and over, and they're all the same. And um, yeah, it's just very interesting. I don't know if they're all true, but like these ones, you have kings and queens. The moral of the story is you have kings and queens in castles who were considered kings and queens by the people who are still in control as kings and queens, and that's in the 1700s, which isn't too long ago. So I think that is very interesting. And it's very interesting that these people aren't considered kings or queens anymore, and they're some of the most marginalized people that exist. And education has been basically like that. That's something that's something that else is a problem too, because the populations and the way people are educated, it's not a lot of people can tie all these things together and realize how much power they still may have.
What was there was like some land grant act we were looking into recently that founded a lot of universities in the United States. There was like the land taken away from the natives.
Yeah, I was just kind of gabbing about that earlier. I'll bring it up in one second. I just always forget what it's called. It's called the um, doctrine of discovery. And this is why the discovery, I don't know if I'm the discovery doctrine or doctrine of discovery is a disputed interpretation of international law during the age of discovery, sorry, introduced into the United States municipal law by the U.S. Supreme Court Justice John Marshall in 1823. And Marshall's formulation of the doctrine, discovery of the territory previously unknown to Europeans, gave the discovering nation title to that territory against all other European nations, and this title could be perfected by possession. A number of legal scholars have criticized Marshall's interpretation of the relevant international law. In recent decades, advocates for indigenous rights have campaigned against the doctrine. In 2023, the Vatican formally repudiated the doctrine. Why I think this is important is because it's still part of law and it's so late in history. So I believe that's why it's important when they forced people to choose sides back in 1740s or whenever we were just talking about, because if they identified as natives, then they weren't European and their land could all be just taken from them right then and there if someone had a flag to plant on the ground, so to speak.
Can you click the source for that first part? Because I can't tell if they're talking about them repudiating the actual original agreement or repudiating the lawsuit against it. Where it says one.
Well, sorry, what would you want me to click? Marshall versus Johnson versus
At the very
How?
bottom, like the source at the very bottom of that first paragraph, because I just want to find out what they're talking about. Did they go? Is it saying that they went against the original agreement, or are they going against the lawsuit? Or I guess it wasn't an agreement, but it was forced upon the natives, because it says that in 2023 they repudiated it.
Yeah, and the number, when I click that thing, it just says Vatican repudiates doctrine of discovery used as justification for colonization.
Yeah, so that should mean it isn't in effect anymore, though, officially. But then again, it could have been transferred to another source of power. Who knows?
it's
usually the
still
case.
it's still kind of in effect in Canada, I believe, sort of. But
Yeah, because you were talking about earlier how Thomas Jefferson, I think, was like kind of continued it later on, right? So it would make
in
sense.
1792, U.S. Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson claimed that the doctrine of discovery was international law, which was applicable to new United States government as well. The discovery doctrine was expounded by the United States Supreme Court in a series of decisions, most notably Johnson versus McIntosh in 1823. In that case, Chief Justice John Marshall held that under generally accepted principles of international law, discovery of lands previously unknown to Europeans gave the discovering nation title to that land against all other European nations, and this title could be perfected by possession. The nation discovering that land had the sole right of acquiring the soil from the natives and establishing settlements upon it. On discovery, the sovereignty of the indigenous peoples and their rights to sell their land were diminished, but the right of occupancy remained. The discovering nation, having ultimate title to the land, had right to sell the land of indigenous peoples, subject to the latter's right of occupancy. The ultimate title of the discovering nation, in this case Britain, passed to the individual states after the Declaration of Independence, then to the United States in 1789. So I don't know. That's some pretty big stuff, and that's not like
That
too
is.
long ago.
Appreciate you sharing. Shem, did you want me to pull up your screen again? Oh, that's awesome stuff, Elkman. Appreciate it.
Yeah, a buddy of mine tipped me off on that one and said it was a good one that I should look into. So I'm still digging it, but that's the gist of it. And it's interesting because in my mind, it also makes those choices all those people had to make far more like not a choice. And
Right,
yeah,
the reasons for all the rebellions, and also probably why so many were sent to insane asylums, as well as the indigenous populations put into the abusive residential schools to, genocide the culture and the old history from them.
yeah.
Shem, you're muted,
Sam,
brother.
you're on mute, bro.
Oh, that makes more sense.
Now we can hear you.
So yeah, people are talking about pirates in the comments, so figured we could go full conspiracy for a second to finish her off with.
All
Sweet.
right.
So yeah, you were talking about how they went to go went to go visit Queen Anne, and she was apparently overthrown or something. I don't remember the exact story. It's been a while since I learned about this, but there's some kind of conspiracy that these pirates down here were allegedly like Jewish or something. So the Queen Anne connection is kind of funny because we were talking about how all these people could be connected. So that would explain why this is, by the way, we're going full conspiracy for a second, but that would explain
Yeah.
why these kings from North America who are allegedly Tartars, who would allegedly be tied all the way back to the Semites, would be visiting their other Semites over in the UK back in those days. I don't know. Very stupid.
And
But
one thing, like when you're a kid, what do you picture a pirate wearing as a shirt? Do you picture it as a black and white striped shirt, like as if he was maybe like a prisoner or
Skull
a
and
criminal?
crossbones.
Yeah,
yeah, I don't know what I imagine. I never think about pirates.
I don't know. I always picture him. I always picture him with like a black and white striped shirt, which is also like the stereotypical French guy shirt or criminal shirt. So I just thought that was all funny as well.
Ah, good point.
Yeah, and pirate I think is a French word too.
It's a
Possibly.
pretty intricate design for the pirates back in the day. Well, yeah. I
Well, flags were way more important back in the day too.
think I'm gonna get going though, because I'm getting pretty hungry. I don't know if you want
Yeah, for
to
sure.
keep
We can.
going. Or...
That's all good. We're an hour and a half in, and I could leave it at this. Pretty good info that we covered tonight. Appreciate you guys sharing it, and can do her again before the week is done. And you guys are up for it?
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on.
Well, always a pleasure. I thank you. Any last words there, Elkman?
I don't know, man. Just, I don't know. Thanks for having me as well. And I'll catch y'all later on this week sometime. I don't think
Always
there
a
was
pleasure,
anything I
brother.
forget and miss out on, but yeah, whatever. Talk soon.
I
That was the chat.
appreciate it.
Appreciate you.
Indeed. Thank you, everyone, for watching. And we'll also be putting together a collaboration episode in the next 2 weeks on exclusively on the Chicago World's Fair, I believe. Right? Or all World's Fairs or just Chicago?
Yeah, we're working on part 3 right now for it. Oh, one last thing we could talk about, this fleur-de-lis ottoman thing up in Canada back in 1555, because this is before Canada was even a thing, right?
And it
Yeah.
says Canada on it before Canada is even a thing. And it's got potentially the crescent moon of the Islamic or the Tartars,
Yeah,
or
the Ottoman. It was basically
Ottoman.
described as the Ottoman Empire, but it could represent something completely different. But yeah.
That was
Right?
on like the Virginia flag at the time too, as well.
Yeah, it's down further as well. Down in Florida, same things.
That's wild, right? Evidence possibly of the Moorish or of the Ottomans.
Yeah, really weird stuff.
Oh, and the fleur-de-lis there. That's wild.
And yeah, that was before New France as well, I think, too.
This is Florida. Another interesting thing is this in Mexico City, this guy in this book is claiming this is a mosque pictured on this map with the crescent moon on top of it.
Sure looks like it.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the Florida map. You can kind of see it in the thumbnail right here, but I don't know why when I click on it, it's not there. Yeah. Oh well. There we go. Oh. Right, well, let's
Not
just call it.
cooperate.
We tried. Have a good night, everyone. Appreciate you.
All right. Much love. Thank you, guys. And we will be back. Tomorrow with Hans Dietrich Woo Woo Wednesday. If you're free, I can send you guys the links, and hopefully we'll see everyone there.
Appreciate the invite.
Sounds good, man.
Probably stop by.
Much love. Till then.